In honor of Tandy, today we're featuring a very special piece of hardware from the Tandy product line. Today we're covering the Network 2 right here on Vintage Geek. Just a reminder, if you like vintage technology, vintage computers, especially Tandy, be sure to like and subscribe. It's going to help us a lot as we grow, and I encourage you to become a Vintage Geek member. You can do that at our website at vintagegeek.com. Last time on Vintage Geek, we covered the TRS-80 Model 1, the first incarnation of a personal computer by the Radio Shack Corporation. It wasn't long before Tandy realized that they needed a way for these computers to be able to communicate, because one of their key markets and their key customers were the educational field or schools. Getting computers into schools was no small task. Obviously, these computers were expensive, even the lower priced models. From a classroom perspective, especially if you were going to have multiple Model 1 computers, for example, you had a lot of hardware that you had to buy. But you would also need to have some way of loading programs onto all of the different computers. You could take the approach of getting a cassette recorder for each and every system, but if you had an actual computer lab, that was a lot of cassette players and cassettes to deal with, not to mention the fact that you had the cost of the software itself. You would potentially have to buy 16 different copies in a lab that was set up that way, which wasn't super practical. Then you would have to make sure that every student knew how to use the cassette recorder, that they were loading the tapes properly, and I'm sure the list went on and on. So Radio Shack came up with something called the network controller. There were some different versions of the network controller over the years. It was basically a metal box that contained some LED lights for different workstations and a rotary dial selector switch, as well as a couple of toggle switches. What did this box do? Tandy and Radio Shack, with their product line, were reliant a lot on cassettes to load programs, and in order to do that, they used an audio feed from the cassette player. It used audio to transfer data from one point to the other. So Radio Shack and Tandy got the idea, well, what if we just use that concept and use the audio model to distribute software across a network of computers? And that's what the network controller set out to do. Essentially, it gave you the capability of having up to 16 machines in a given room. Each were connected with a 5-pin DIN connector cable, similar to the cable that was used on the cassette interface. Now, the first version of this was designed specifically for the Model 1 that ran Level 1 Basic. This was capable of doing 500 baud on a cassette. So what the box did essentially was provide an interface that could take the output of one teacher type computer, or the lead computer in the classroom, take the outputted data from that in an audio form, and actually distribute that audio to up to 16 different machines. Now, they also thought, well, what if we want to get data back from the student workstations to the teacher? Let's say that there was a program that required you to save test results or something like that. You could reverse the process, but when you reverse the process, it wasn't a broadcast. It was just designed to go from that particular student machine back to the teacher. That's why you have the rotary dial that was part of the network controller, so that the teacher could actually dial up a particular workstation and be able to retrieve data back using, again, the cassette interface to do so. I do not know how many of these were actually sold, but it wasn't too long before they came out with the Network 2 controller, and that's what we're covering today. The Network 2 controller was fundamentally the same as the Network 1, with one key difference. In the time between the Network 1 controller and the Network 2, Tandy had come out with the Color Computer line. The Tandy Color Computer was very exceptional in the fact that you could use it with any television. This made the cost to get into using these systems a lot less expensive, and it made them easier for schools to afford. If you had the capability of using this kind of network concept with a whole bunch of color computers, it would be even more cost effective than trying to do something with, say, the Model 1 or maybe the Model 3. So, to cover all their bases, the Network 2 controller was capable of functioning with Level 2 Basic, which actually could operate at 1500 baud, or about 3 times the speed of the original Level 1. It does all the same things. You can take one master program and distribute it to an entire classroom, and you can get the info back from the student workstations, and you can do this using either the color computer or a combination of Model 1s and Model 3s. So it gave you some pretty cool flexibility, and this was really the first example that I've seen of any kind of school network system for a computer. Obviously, the network concept went far beyond this in later years, but this one is very rudimentary. At the heart of it, it is really just an audio amplifier and a decoder chip that is decoding the various sources. There's not a lot to it on the inside, but it is a pretty useful device, and today I want to see what it's like to use this in a quasi-classroom environment. Granted, we don't have 16 machines, but we can certainly show how it's supposed to work just using a teacher machine and a student machine. machine, and we plan to do that today right here on Vintage Geek. So I have our Network 2 set up here in a very simplified version. We have a color computer here. This is one of the first models of the color computer. We also have our TDP System 100 that we've covered in a previous video. The reason that I have these particular color computers for the demonstration today is because the system really doesn't work with the Color Computer 2 or the Color Computer 3. I think the reason for that is there may be a difference in the audio levels from the cassette port coming out of those later models. But using the Color Computer 1 and the TDP System 100, which is fundamentally the Color Computer 1 inside, seems to work great. So basically the way that this works is you have your teacher computer, and that's going to be my Color Computer 1 right here, and a student computer plugged into port number 1, my TDP System 100. There are on the back of the network controller obviously all the ports for those different student workstations. There's a port for the actual CPU or the computer for the teacher, and there's a cassette port. The cassette port obviously plugs into the cassette recorder that would have come with your teacher system, so you could load software directly onto the teacher computer and then distribute it as necessary. So what I'm going to do the basic test on this is I'm just going to run a very simple basic program on our teacher computer. So if we put in a print statement here, hello student, and just so you know, the video image that we're capturing for the teacher computer is a little bit grainier than the other. And that's because the RF output is different on the Color Computer 1, so we're not quite getting the same image quality that we do on the TDP. Hopefully you can bear with us on that one, and we can demonstrate this regardless. We're just going to put in a print statement just to kind of demonstrate what this does. Obviously, it's a single line program. If we run it, it's going to simply say, hello student. What we want to do is go ahead and transfer this very simple program to the student computer. Now there is a few switches on the Network 2 controller that we're going to need to look at here. One is of course the power switch. We've got to turn it on to make it work. We do have a LED indicator on the front of the device telling us that we have power to the system. The power supply for the Network 2 controller is the same power supply that they used for the Model 1. Kind of handy there. The other switches we have on the front of the unit actually control the baud rate. In our case, we are going to use the 1500 baud as we're using the Color Computer system, and that's its default. Then we finally have the mode switch here at the bottom. This one's pretty important because this is going to determine if we, at the teacher workstation, are going to be loading a program from the cassette or loading it from a student workstation. We've got it in cassette mode right now. I'm going to go ahead and put this in multiplex because we're going to use this for the network purpose right now. On the student workstation, you basically put this into a load state by putting in the cload command or cassette load. It's going to put this into its searching mode. We can see that the LED actually lights up for workstation number 1 where this is plugged in. This would tell the teacher in a very quick glance if all the students had properly put their machines into the load mode. Now if we go ahead and save the program from the teacher workstation, I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. We're just going to call it hello. So I put in my csave command, and the minute I do this, it should see it on the other machine. So let's see what happens. It's found hello and it's loaded it, and now we've got OK on both machines. This means that the program should now exist on the student computer as well. And if I go ahead and type run on the student machine, hello student, there's our program. Obviously we're talking about one line of code here, so that's not super impressive, but the process actually does work. Now let's say we want to go the other direction. On this machine I'm going to go ahead and clear it out by typing new. Then I'm going to put a different print statement in here. We're going to go hello teacher. Run that. That looks good. In order to get the student data back to the teacher machine, you would have to dial up on the rotary selector here which machine you want to get data from. Now in this case, we are using machine number 1. We're going to do the same process in reverse. If we do cload on the teacher workstation, it's going to put that in search mode, and then we're going to do a csave. And I really don't have to put an actual program name in here because it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and hit csave on this, and then it's found something. It's loaded it. Let's see if we can run it. Hello teacher. So now we've successfully transferred data from the actual teacher workstation to the student workstation, and we've gone the other direction and gone from the student back to the teacher. It's incredibly simple, but it is effective, and I could see where this would be really important for classrooms of that time period. So to get a better feel for how this works, we're now going to try to run a real program and load it on the student workstation. Now for this, I am going to use the Coco SDC. I've decided after trying a number of different cassettes and programs that we've had that it's going to be the best way to do it because we just don't have quite the proper candidate of software for our cassette world that we do on the SDC, and we can use the exact same process that we just demonstrated in order to get a program to run on both machines. I'm also going to bring in a special guest for this so that we have someone to be our student, quote unquote, for our experiment today as we test out the Network 2 controller in a real classroom environment. And we are going to be doing that in our next video. Just want to remind you, if you like vintage computers, vintage Tandy gear, network controllers, or any of this vintage tech, be sure to like and subscribe. We make videos like this each and every week. I also encourage you to become a Vintage Geek member. We've got all sorts of extra content, extra code goodies, and a whole lot more. It's all on the website. You can join there at vintagegeek.com. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.